Good afternoon. I don't know where the rest of you are, but I'm glad to see that the main people are here. So, I want to introduce Dr. James Birdsong. His bio reads that he is a career Air Force officer. Dr. Birdsong served as a command C-130 pilot, headquarters staff officer, academic instructor, and squadron operations officer. He's held various positions in finance, operations, safety, systems engineering, and strategic planning, and has extensive international aviation experience. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and Auburn University, and has served in higher education for more than 10 years. As the program coordinator, he is responsible for all facets of Auburn aviation, to include teaching, research, and outreach. James is Auburn's principal investigator for the FAA's Technical Training and Human Performance Center of Excellence, and serves as a member of the Training and Human Performance Center of Excellence Executive Leadership Committee. So I know this is going to be interesting, and I've been told by my granddaughter, who's a student in the aviation program, that Dr. Birdsong is an excellent speaker. So I'm looking forward to hearing this, and I'm sure you will be too.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So, War Eagle, good afternoon. All right, so I'll talk to you guys basically this afternoon. I think got a whole hour and a half. Won't go that long, but I want to touch on essentially the history of the aviation program and where we're going as we fly into the future. So thank you very much for having me, and gotten to meet a couple of y'all over the years. I used to work in outreach years ago, and so knew Mary and a lot of the folks that worked with Ollie. So it's always fun to come back here. And but basically, I want to talk about the aviation, basically the environment that we work in today, the organization itself, the people that we have, the facilities, the academics, the changes that we made in the last several years. As you know, Auburn has a long history here with aviation, and then where we're headed moving forward. So got to take the mighty 172 right over downtown Chicago, coming home from Oshkosh a couple of years ago, and I can tell you it's probably faster to drive in a car from Wisconsin back to Auburn than it is to take a Cessna 172, but it was a lot of fun. And but we'll talk about some of that. So Auburn University Aviation started, the seeds were planted back in the early, just prior to 1910. Some of the roots can be traced there. Y'all may know this, but the Wright Brothers' first flight school was just down the road in Montgomery, Alabama. For those of y'all that served in the Air Force, it's where Maxwell Air Force Base is today. They had a unique problem. They first flew in 1903, documented, of course, had the camera there, key piece of evidence. And but as they transported that Wright Flyer around, they didn't have roads and railroads and things like that we enjoy today with modern transportation systems. So they had to take it apart, move it, buggy, horse, everything, to get it to its next location. And so, as we know, Dayton, Ohio was the Silicon Valley of its era back in the early 1900s, but it wasn't necessarily the best flying weather. So they came south, and their first flight school was in Montgomery, Alabama in 1910. And they had a unique problem. I mean, they're trying to sell people on this idea of flying, and the industry was basically, the technology was new, so people were just learning how to use it. So they started their flight school, and then they came to Auburn just prior to that to get some assistance with some of the early faculty that we had here in engineering, and to basically redesign, make some tweaks to their designs, and refigure and reconfigure some of the aircraft, the transitional Wright Flyers, to make them more transportable so they could travel around with these things. Again, it wasn't like they took off and flew back home to Dayton, Ohio on the earlier Wright Flyers. So they came to aerospace engineering here, and they got what went on to become aerospace engineering. But of course, back then we were the Alabama Polytechnical Institute. So these early faculty that helped them redesign, and it's all been documented just prior to them opening their flight school that they were here in Auburn. You know, these faculty are curious people, and they were like, what is this machine they have, and what can we learn from it? What can we take and do with it in the future? And so the application piece. So there were some early on sprinkled aerospace education courses in the curriculum at Auburn University. The program was in the engineering school, And that's where it started. And so, again, kind of a smattering of aerospace. They called it aerospace administration, so kind of business courses associated with aviation. And those were the early courses, and that was in the 1920s, 1930s, is where those courses started to kind of pick up steam. Auburn University Airport, which is now owned by Auburn University, was a private field back in this time too. And people were flying there, and again, the South was a nice place for aviation in terms of weather and all that. And so it was an attractive place to come. But Auburn University kind of upscaled the whole aviation program with the application for the civilian pilot training program. So the civilian pilot training program was part of the New Deal. President Roosevelt knew we needed pilots. Today, in today's Air Force, we have about 12,000 pilots. Back in 1939, 2 years before we went into World War II, we had 4,500 pilots in the U.S. military. That was it. We had a third of the pilots then of what we carry today in peacetime. And so President Roosevelt knew we needed a way to train pilots, and we need to do it fast, because watching what's going on in the European continent and around the rest of the world, we had to upscale our training pipeline. And so that civilian pilot training program gave federal dollars to any institution that could train pilots to essentially be put into a pool of civilians. And so you think about folks that have private pilot licenses, essentially, they have the basic skills of flying. And then out of that pool, they can be drawn on and come serve in the military. So that civilian pilot training program was passed. It was 1939. Auburn University applied to be a part of the civilian pilot training program. But there was one catch. You had to have a runway. And so they bought the airport for $375. The university president back then bought that airport for $375, put it on the application, and the rest is history. Alabama, Georgia Tech, some other schools that didn't have airports didn't end up getting into the aviation game as a result. And so that's our roots, is actually when we talk about large scale, going just from courses, but to actual flight education programs. So that's our roots, 1939. The first student showed up here in 1941. We trained about 1,100 pilots here at Auburn University that went on to fly in the civilian pilot training program, or that were trained, and then many of those went on to serve in the U.S. military in World War II. So through that transition, that was all done under the College of Engineering, and that's where the program basically stayed until the late 1990s. The aviation management and professional flight program stayed there until the late 1990s. They moved to the College of Business, and then of course 9/11 happened. The airline industry was not in a good position post 9/11, and quite honestly, not just the airlines, but everybody in aviation. And so the timing of when it moved from engineering to College of Business was kind of unfortunate with regards to what happened in the aviation industry. But no puns intended. But the program never really took off in the College of Business, because there were several things that happened along the way that I'll talk about, how we certify pilots today, and there was a need for it to eventually move out of the College of Business to better help the students per new FAA regulations. So we moved to University College 2 years ago, and then last year we moved to College of Liberal Arts. So once we get through all 12, 13 colleges, we get a free punch card that we've been in all of them. But we've been in a lot of colleges, so we're good at moving. And it's interesting, because if you work in the collegiate aviation environment, you realize that most schools outside of Embry-Riddle, which is an aeronautical university, they kind of have trouble placing nice and neatly where aviation fits in the whole college spectrum, because we're very interdisciplinary. We're not just engineering, we're some psychology, some business and all these things. And so that's our lineage, essentially, is that's how we got to the College of Liberal Arts today. That's always my number one question when new parents come in. It's like, how is your aviation program in the College of Liberal Arts? Well, we actually were already doing research with the psychology department, because human factors has always been a big element in aviation. Why supposedly smart people do dumb things in airplanes, and and it's a really big research area right now because of the youngsters that are coming into the program. So, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So there's a picture, an early edition of Photoshop. So this is downtown Montgomery. There's the Wright brothers doing a flyby on their way into Maxwell. So this book is actually this picture's out of a book, The History of Aviation in Alabama. So this is not an actual photograph of the Wright brothers flying over downtown Montgomery. But if you go to Montgomery today, you'll recognize the fountain and a lot of those buildings right there. And then, but Maxwell Air Force Base is literally just on the other side of what's now Interstate 65. And that's where the Wright brothers, that's where the first flight school was. And so seeing a Wright flyer flying around Montgomery wasn't necessarily a super uncommon occurrence. But again, they weren't doing the Top Gun, the pattern's full, I'm going to fly by low, And because risk taking was a little bit different back then than it was now. So a lot of people died trying to figure out how to learn to fly airplanes. And so, but that was then, this is now. So aviation today. So you have this fast-growing aviation industry that's essentially undermanned and growing at a rapid pace as a result of some of these trends that we see around the world. Globalized economies, everything's connected. And so here in Alabama, East Alabama, we have auto manufacturing companies that make parts for Kia and Hyundai, and then those parent companies are over in Korea. So everything's interconnected. You have exponential population growth. So India is a country of 1.4 billion people. Their aviation industry is growing at a rate of 20% year over year. So if you do the math, you quickly realize, and it makes sense why so many people in India are ordering Airbus and Boeing aircraft, some of the largest orders ever made. In China a couple weeks ago made a record order for a lot of their airlines from Airbus. But again, they're also a country of 1.4 billion people. The whole center of gravity for aviation is essentially shifting from North America and Europe to Asia Pacific region. And so, but that's as a result of the population growth, shifting demographics. So again, you have growing middle classes in those countries that are developing. Security is obviously a really big issue in aviation. People are always trying to figure out ways to essentially get themselves into the system, and we saw post 9/11, how important that is, and a lot of the assumptions we used to make in the world of security no longer apply. Everything changed after 9/11, and so you're seeing a lot of different technologies come in as a result of the need for safety and security, and so I don't know if any of y'all been to Atlanta Hartsfield lately, but they have biometric scanners in there now. So they're scanning you as you walk through the airport, and they can quickly, kind of like the parking folks do here on campus, they can scan your car and get you a ticket if you need it or not. So lots of new technologies that are helping with security, but also new technologies in the sense that we have autonomous cars. And what's the impact of those once those become normalized in our society? Are people going to be ready to jump on airplanes that don't have pilots? Perhaps, maybe, maybe not. And but as these things become more normalized, a car that can drive itself down the road, if you think about that, and then you think about small drones, perhaps autonomous drones that can fly you across town, so we could all, call one of these Uber sky taxis, come pick us up and run us down to Montgomery real quick. And, but all these new technologies are coming along and will definitely change in the shape of aviation of the future. And so, there's a connection probably somewhere in here between autonomous cars, drones, and large airplanes that, Boeing 767, that essentially doesn't really need pilots on it, quite honestly, at this point. That thing could fly without pilots. It's a matter of what the rules say, of course, pilots unions and some other things too, but there's going to be a connection, a thread between there, because these will be the disruptive technologies that that change the industry. And so, probably nobody yet is ready to get on an airplane without a pilot. My favorite prediction of the future is going to be that there will be one pilot in the cockpit and a dog, and the dog's job is to bite the pilot if he tries to touch anything. So we'll see where things go with technology. But this was us here at Auburn University a couple years ago at the Texas A&M game. So unmanned aircraft systems, and it was kind of funny, the backlash. There's two sides to every story, but this all started essentially with, let's fly in the game ball. This will be a cool, aviation project working with aerospace engineering, and we'll design this. So we took a drone, and the engineering school added essentially the landing gear. Once it lands, it closes and holds the football until it gets. Anyway, there was some engineering involved to make this happen. And so those of y'all that were at the football game, Texas A&M several years ago, this thing flew around right before the game started, before Nova came out, and this dropped the game ball. And it was cool, and it was kind of a cool technology thing. But what ended up happening, that required a 40-page waiver to the FAA to make that happen, because you're flying an aircraft, a registered aircraft, over inside basically a security zone, a temporary flight restricted stadium. There's no aircraft allowed over Jordan-Hare within plus or minus 3 hours of a football game. And so we're already breaking rules. We had to write a 40-page waiver to get that approved. And all the work that went into it, and it's like, all right, whew, we did it, it's good. And then Dr. Goog's like, that was awesome, let's do it again next week. And so and it was great, and it was a lot of fun. But the last game that season was a night game, and so you were not allowed to fly drones at night without waivers and lights because they don't have. But this is, no kidding, a registered aircraft today in the FAA database. And so again, technology is changing how we use it. And the kind of the funny side about this too was that a lot of folks were kind of getting upset, like, is this going to replace the Eagles? And you know, the answer is no. And so last year there was no talk of doing drones, and of course the folks that had to do all the paperwork with the FAA were pretty relieved about that. But this technology, again, you know, it's kind of a gimmick, but also to show, you know, what's possible out there. So this is a screenshot of news yesterday. So the FAA certified Google's wing drone delivery company to operate as an airline. So Google is the first company that was approved essentially with an air carrier certificate, meaning they are fully legal to carry cargo inside a drone in the United States. That's a big deal. And we'll be looking back 100 years from now and go, yep, that was a big day. That was the day that the FAA first said, it's okay, you can use drones to carry commercial cargo. And so this is a really big deal. It's kind of under the radar with a lot of the news, but in our world of aviation, this will be quite interesting because now the technologies, the policies, everything's starting to link up. Yes, sir?
What are the dimensions?
I think it's that particular one, I want to say it's like 8, 9 feet, something like that. Relatively small. Again, a lot of this is still actually being researched and developed. And, but essentially they were the first ones to get through the FAA certification process. And so there will be many, many more coming, I have a feeling. We go down to Atlanta Center a lot, which controls all the airspace, basically 14,000 feet and above from Virginia all the way over to Alabama. There's actually corridors through that airspace now for non-piloted or unpiloted aircraft. And so this integration of unmanned and manned aircraft it's a big deal, and there's going to be a lot of headaches to figure out and stuff, but the fact Google got this done. So I've got Google up here, I've got Amazon, so all these technology companies, you know, it's quite interesting. And so we'll see where a lot of that goes. So those are some of the things that are shaping the environment, the aviation environment. But from an economic impact standpoint, it's important that we have good connectivity in our transportation systems, because ultimately that's what fuels business. So most of the large businesses in the United States today, you're going to have some kind of footprint overseas. So again, being able to travel back and forth. And again, we have internet and the ability to meet on, you know, through the web, GoToMeeting.com, virtual teleconferences, but the physical connection between people is still a really big deal, especially when you start thinking about business deals. And so the FAA puts out a report every year of how important aviation is to the U.S. economy. And it's true. I mean, it's somewhat of a you know, a self-licking ice cream cone in the sense that they got to go out and say, yes, aviation's important, aviation's important. But if you remember the days right after 9/11 when there was not an aircraft flying in the sky, everything canceled, it was quite weird. And I was stationed in Atlanta at the time flying with the reserves, and it was really weird and spooky to take off and not have any commercial aircraft in the air. We were flying because of the military. But so it's important. And so again, it connects all those local, you know, the regional, the local, the national, the global economies. It's important. And so the Airlines for America, which is the lobbying group for the Airline Association, calls it the physical internet. And so again, they're out there to push the industry, but you know, that personal equity, that equity that we build through relationships is important. And so again, big companies that are going to sign big deals, they're going to want more than just let's meet on the internet and sign a multi-billion-dollar deal. So people are going to keep traveling, and again, more and more and more as the world's population grows. So we're about 7 billion people right now. By 2050, we'll be at about 9 billion people. And so when you look at the International Air Transport Association, that's the globe's airline organization, or basically an organization made up of all the world's large airlines. About 280 airlines are members of that. That's their trade organization. So last year we had about 4 billion people travel. This next year we'll have about 20 years from now we'll have about 8 billion. And so, and again, I mentioned the whole aviation industry, there's a push to move it, or the center of gravity is essentially shifting again from the US and North America and Europe more towards Asia Pacific due to the shifting demographics and all. So right now, this is a screenshot I took just a little while ago. So talking about connecting local economies. So back in 2010, 2013, I believe it was, is when Korean Airlines started a nonstop flight between Atlanta and Seoul, Korea. And so this airplane, it started with an Airbus 380. Today they're flying a Boeing 747-800. So that was a screenshot of the plane. It flies nonstop back and forth. And that's all that airplane does. It goes Atlanta to Seoul, lands, gets a new crew, turns around and comes back. And so when they started that, that was the first nonstop between these countries. And of course, you think about, Kia, Hyundai, and again, all the smaller, lower tier companies that provide parts. There's a need to travel back and forth. And so there's a lot of folks on that airplane that are probably business travelers. Again, there's a lot of business that's going to occur as a result of these folks traveling. So it's a nice example of how the economies, again, the regional and the global economies interconnect. And know also that Delta also flies this route now, 2 flights a day, and Korean Airlines. So now there's a total of 4 flights back and forth. So when you think about the volume, how fast things are growing, this is the perfect example of demand and again, making sure there's enough supply on that route. But years ago, the Wright brothers probably would have never dreamed of jumping in an airplane, flying 14, 15 hours across the the Pacific, and no big deal, right? And so today, this is normal. And we have some grads that fly the Airbus 350 that literally got in Thursday night. We're here Friday for our advisory board meeting, and he's like, where am I? What country am I in? But that's the world of aviation these days. You can travel a lot of distances very quickly in a lot of time zones and trying to keep up. And so this is a screenshot from IATA. It's a couple years old, but essentially it's got data showing where the largest growth is. And so again, Africa, 92 million passengers back in 2016, expected to triple in the next 20 years. But if you look at Asia Pacific, again, that's where the volume is essentially. Here in North America, we're going to continue to grow, but we're going to grow at a steady rate of probably about 5 to 6%, which is our norm. But it's the other side of the world that's growing very quickly, again, with globalized economies and all those things. And so another piece of the environment is that we have an aging workforce issue. So hence all the requirements, all the efforts put into growing the program here at Auburn University and the need to make sure that it's healthy and has as much capacity as possible. You have a very large turnover in air traffic control, pilots, and maintenance right now. So if you stop and think about 2001, a lot of the airlines had to furlough their pilots, maintenance workers, air traffic controllers. Still, they weren't necessarily impacted with regards to their job security. But the maintenance and the pilots, essentially, there wasn't a lot of hiring in the airline industry in the early 2000s. And so the people that worked in the airlines continued to age out, and they didn't have new folks coming in. So for any organization to be healthy, you've got to be replenishing the folks that are walking out the door, make sure you got fresh talent coming in the door. And so on the pilot side, there's a large disconnect because the airlines in the United States did not hire large groups of pilots during that time from about 2000 to 2001 to about 2011. And so it's resulted in this pilot shortage, and or essentially the demand is so large right now to backfill all these pilots, because as a pilot you have to retire at age 65. It used to be age 60, they moved it to 65 in 2007, and as an air traffic controller you have to retire at age 55. And so, that's 55 is not old to retire, but there's a large turnover as a result of retirements, forced retirements in air traffic controller, ATC, and the pilots. You can be a triathlete, but you cannot stay beyond 65 if you're a pilot, 55 if you're an air traffic controller. Maintenance, a little bit different shortage, but they have the same challenge because there's just a lack of qualified folks that can work in that career field. And the chief financial officer at Delta, who is an Auburn graduate, Paul Jacobson, kind of jokes about it, but is serious. You don't really need pilots if you don't have maintenance folks, because you have to have there's about 8 maintenance folks required to generate every aircraft to be at the gate. And so you have to have a large workforce. So we have this disconnect. And just throw out a few numbers at you. So American Airlines, 75% of their workforce, their pilot workforce, will retire in the next 10 years. 75%. So Delta has 14,500 pilots. 8,000 are going to have to retire in the next 10 years. So that's 800 pilots a year they have to hire just to keep the company the size that it is right now. And so we at Auburn maybe graduate 40 pilots a year, so Delta's only got to go find 760 other pilots. And so there's a real shortage out there, and But it's, again, it's a great opportunity, but aging workforce, and so that retirement is hitting on this huge. And then there's another question: how do I educate and train people to, how do I use new technologies to get out there and leverage people's strengths? You have these, the students we have in school today, I mean, they're extremely digitally savvy when it comes to technology, iPads, all that kind of stuff. How do you leverage that to best fill the gaps that are in the workforce? And so there's a lot of research being done in that. But one of the reasons that there's a pilot shortage, some people would argue that, I'll kind of set the stage here, but there were some pilot regulations that changed as a result of 2 accidents in 2009. So the first accident, you guys are probably familiar with, the Miracle on the Hudson, Sully Sullenberger. So plane takes off out of LaGuardia going to Charlotte, Airbus 320, 150 passengers on board, five crew, and we know the story. Climbing through 2,500 feet, loses both engines, right over the city of New York, and it's like, what are you going to do? You got no engines left, and not a good position to be in, obviously. And if you've never heard the audio tapes of this, go do it. I mean, it's impressive, because you've basically got till the end of your life to make decisions on how you're going to handle this situation. So obviously they decided to ditch in the river. All they had was essentially some momentum they were carrying, kinetic energy they had from the aircraft, and got the job done, landed in the river. 155 people lived, all right? People got wet, scary, all that, but everybody walked away. And again, they just celebrated the 10th anniversary of this a few months ago. And so a very significant event in aviation, so much so they made a Tom Hanks movie about it, right? But then there was another accident a month later in the same state. And this accident didn't have a good outcome. This was a Bombardier Q400, Colgan Air 3407 is the flight number. It was operated by Continental Express. It was a Bombardier Q400 aircraft, a twin-engine turboprop, had 45 passengers, 4 crew on board, and the plane was going from Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York, and left, it was on approach, it left late, it was on approach about 10:30 at night, and the plane just got slow. 5 miles from the airport, it stalled and killed everybody, to include one person on the ground who was watching the 10 o'clock news, and landed on his house. And that was all that was left of it. We actually have a student that in our program right now that lived 5 blocks from this accident, and so, so this was, as a child, he experienced this. But so everybody died in this accident, and it was horrible, and people went back, and of course they're like, okay, good airplane that lost 2 engines became a bad airplane that everybody lived. Perfectly good airplane gets slow, falls out of the sky. How does that possibly happen in 2009? Don't we have smart systems on board the airplane to remind the pilots of what they need to be paying attention to? So I mentioned human factors, the psychology of aviation. So when they started to peel back the layers of this accident, it got really ugly really quick. The captain of the aircraft was a guy in his 30s that decided in his 30s that he wanted to become a pilot. So he went to flight school down in Florida, not through a collegiate aviation program. Learned to fly, but he failed a couple of check rides, his instrument check ride, how to fly in the weather, and commercial. He failed both of those. The company that hired him never knew it. He's from Florida, trained in Florida, yet flying in Buffalo, New York on a nice, standard February night in Buffalo, New York with icing conditions and other things. And then the co-pilot was young. She lived in Seattle, was a recent graduate of Central Washington University, built her hours, got a job with the regionals, which is the way it used to work. That's where you cut your teeth. But she lived with her parents because she only made $16,000 a year, and you cannot live in Seattle or in Newark for $16,000 a year. And so she also worked as a barista. She hadn't slept in 2 nights because she has to commute from Seattle by way of Memphis on a FedEx airplane back to Newark. Got to Newark in the morning, tried to sleep in the airport, tried to sleep in the crew lounge. The poor young lady hadn't slept good in 2 days. So this is your pilot of your aircraft back then at night. The captain hadn't slept in a bed in more than a day as well. And so there's all these factors underneath that start to, it's like, okay, I could see how people get tired and they miss things. Well, the other part of this story is that they went back and they looked at the experience that the captain had and the quality of the training that the captain had. He had technically enough hours to do what he was doing, but the quality of the training wasn't robust enough is how the FAA felt in the NTSB. And again, this accident a month earlier, you've already got Sullenberger in Congress testifying about all the bad things that are going on in aviation, because the airlines were in a world of hurt back then in the sense they're trying to cut costs, and again, post 9/11, it's a tough industry to be in. The joke in the industry is essentially when the U.S. economy catches cold, the airlines catch pneumonia. And it's true, and it's a tough business to be in. And you do have to have a lot of passion and to stay in it sometimes, because it is a very volatile industry. But going back to, again, cost cutting and things like that. And so the quality of training started really to show up on people's radar, and they were concerned about how we certify pilots in the United States. So there was a law that resulted, a public law that was passed as a result of that accident. So the license you used to have as a captain in the United, or you still have to have in the United States, is called an Airline Transport Pilot Certificate. It's 1,500 flight hours is the minimum, and there's a lot of training you have to become that captain. The first officer used to only have to have a commercial license, which is only 250 flight hours. So if 250 hours was the minimum that you originally need to be in the right seat, and then we raised it to 1,500, we just raised it by a factor of 6, which I'm all good with. If I'm the traveling public, I'm like, yeah, I'll take more training for that first officer so they make better decisions. But this would have never really prevented that accident in Buffalo, New York from happening. But they did change the law, and it changed the hours required for that person in the right seat. So now the first officer has to have an ATP. They have to have 1,500 hours, right? And they also have to have taken what's called the ATP CTP course. So there's additional academics required. So what all this looks like, if I put it on a timeline, is essentially I come in with 0 hours on the left, and let me switch over here. So this is how we make pilots in the United States. So if I take somebody with no hours, 0 flight time, I bring them in. The first thing they're going to get is their private pilot certificate, which is going to be roughly about 40 hours. And then I do the instrument rating, which is now, and the private, all it's going to let you do is recreational flying. You cannot make any money doing it. Essentially, you can, take your grandfather flying, other things like that. But once you get instrument, now you can fly in low weather conditions, low ceilings, low clouds. And then I have to get the commercial pilot certificate, which is 250 flight hours. So now I'm legal to start charging people to fly with me. That used to be the minimum. You could start at the airlines. And one of the things that Sullenberger told Congress in his testimony is that the first officer on that airplane in Buffalo, New York made $16,000 a year. People were horrified to find out the person that is at the controls of their airplane, that's all this person is making. Unfortunately, you don't make the big bucks in aviation until you get to the larger aircraft. So if you're a young pilot with a commercial certificate, your job opportunities are somewhat limited, or they're harder to find. But that path has changed rapidly in the last several years. It's very clear right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Then you have to get your multi-engine rating, because we don't fly any aircraft that are single engine essentially in the airline industry. And then you get your flight instructor. So what ends up happening? So this is the pathway here at Auburn University now. So if I'm a student at Auburn, I get my private, my instrument, my commercial, my multi, all part of my education here at Auburn. You do not get that ATP certificate here. That takes several years after you graduate typically. And what we do is we also offer the flight instructor certificate. So at college graduation, most students have a flight instructor certificate, and then they have to bridge this gap. Most will graduate with about 350 to 400 flight hours. And for us, our students, 1,500 hours is the ATP minimums. But if you go to a college that has 60 hours of FAA approved curriculum, you get a 500-hour flight allowance. So instead of 1,500 hours, they let you in the cockpit of this airplane at 1,000 hours. So what they're saying is that because you went to college and you took courses that were approved by the FAA, we think you're going to be a better decision maker in that airplane. You're going to realize the risks that are inherent in aviation in your decisions. You're going to be a better decision maker. So we showed how we could use technology to fly airplanes. You could train a lot of folks to fly airplanes, but ultimately what you want is somebody that makes very good decisions up front. They can recognize risk, and they can act appropriately. Because on a clear day like today outside, flying is a treat. But if you're flying from that airplane flying from Atlanta to Seoul, Korea, the weather's going to change. They're 15 hours from landing. And then if they have a mechanical issue on board the airplane, a medical issue, they get to Korea, the weather's, they're low gas, the weather's not cooperating, so things can compound. And so again, you've got to have the wherewithal to recognize that. And so for our students, we want them to be really good decision makers. But what ends up happening is when they graduate, they're flight instructors. They're going to be out there flying, and so you see all the aviation or all the flying at the airport. Those are essentially 23-year-olds teaching 22-year-olds how to fly. And so most of them are young graduates, and they bridge this gap between the time they leave Auburn and they get to the industry by working as a flight instructor here at Auburn. And usually that only takes about a year. So most of our students that graduate, they fly here for a year, they get another year of football season, and then all of a sudden one day they wake up and they're running down to Atlanta to go fly at the airlines once they hit 1,000 hours. And so that's essentially the pathway today for our graduates. And we are a 1,000-hour restricted ATP approved school. The only restriction when you get that restricted ATP is that you cannot be the pilot in charge of that aircraft. You can't be the captain, all right? And so as soon as you hit 1,500 hours, that requirement is removed. And so that's how we produce pilots, or that's how the FAA, that's how they changed as a result of those 2 accidents. So again, us here at Auburn, let me talk a little bit more about the environment. So Auburn is a nice natural fit between, if I draw a line between Mobile, Alabama, home of Airbus final assembly line here in the United States, and Charleston, South Carolina, home of the 787, or one of the 2 787 final assembly lines. And I go a little bit north and a little bit south. I have obviously all the military aviation complexes in South Alabama and Florida. Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport's the busiest airport in the world, home of Delta, and certainly a lot of corporate aviation in Atlanta. Macon, Savannah, and Greensboro, I listed them. You've got corporate aviation, you've got Honda Jet up there. These are a lot of the places that our graduates will end up working. Of course, Huntsville is home to a lot of research done up at Redstone Arsenal that's aviation related. So we're in a nice hub of a growing Southeast aviation corridor. And again, right to work states, again, places, so big labor, big companies like coming down south. So again, Charleston, Mobile, and so a lot of aviation, large commercial aircraft manufacturing is finding its way to the south, right? So that's good for us, all right? So today, going back to essentially our journey, moving through those colleges the last couple of years, we got through the first 100 years of aviation education here at Auburn, and we started to think, okay, we know we're moving out of the College of Business because, and I'll tell you why. So in the College of Business, aviation, we couldn't offer 60 hours of aviation curriculum because at Auburn you have 42 hours of core, and then there's about 30 hours of business, and then to add 60 hours on top of that would have made this degree a 5-year degree in the College of Business, the professional flight degree. So that's what prompted us to move out of the College of Business. So we moved to University College, which was again, designed to be interdisciplinary in nature, and then when Dr. Leith got here, streamlined some things, reorganized, and that college ended up moving in the College of Liberal Arts. But as a result of these moves, the changes in how pilots are certified in the United States, we got to where we are today. And so we redesigned the professional flight and aviation management curriculum, those are our 2 degrees, to essentially allow students to have more on-ramps. Before, if I'm a transfer student from a 2-year school in Alabama, it was almost impossible to finish a degree here in Auburn in 3 or 4 years. It took a while to get through the program. And so we wanted to change that because aviation, not only do you have to pay for tuition, but you have to pay for the flight ratings. And that's a very expensive piece of the equation too. So we wanted more on-ramps for students and then more off-ramps. We wanted more career opportunities for the non-flying students. So that drove the change. We moved to University of College. The Department of Aviation was established. When we were in the College of Business, we were the Department of Aviation, Supply Chain, Management Information Systems, and Business Analytics. We were kind of like where everybody went that didn't fit nice and neatly in any other department in the college. And so through that transition out of the College of Business, we were able to establish the Department of Aviation, which is very helpful. So many of y'all probably know Dr. Bill Hutto. He's the airport director, but he and I work together, and I'm essentially his academic affairs guy for all this. But through that Department of Aviation being established, now you have folks that have aviation backgrounds that are essentially leading the program. And so it's been very, very good. And then, like I said, this past year, a year ago this month, we were notified that we're going to be moving to the College of Liberal Arts. And that's been a wonderful move. Dean Astrup over there is very excited to have an Air Force, as he says. But it's, again, we'd already done research with psychology, so there was some natural tissue connections there anyway before we even moved. So it's been great, and again, sometimes it's a head scratcher when people look at us, but I can tell you University of Oklahoma's in the College of Education. That's where their aviation program is. So we're all a little bit different. And then this coming year, we're essentially going to retool the aviation management program again because when we rewrote it a couple years ago, we essentially had about 4 faculty, and we're in the process of hiring additional faculty right now, so we'll be able to offer more courses. So right now at Auburn, there's 2 distinct aviation organizations. There's the Aviation Center and then the Department of Aviation. So again, the Aviation Center was established in 2014 to essentially kind of be the umbrella organization for all aviation at Auburn. Dr. Hutto is the director of that. And then the Department of Aviation was created 2 years ago, and that's the home of the academic programs here at Auburn, and that falls under the College of Liberal Arts. And so 2 distinct aviation organizations. We wear multiple hats, so it gets a little, I'll say, not confusing, but again, just, you know, I think of it this way. So the Aviation Center is kind of the political action committee for aviation in the state of Alabama. The governor loves to use it for economic development and other things, and so the Department of Aviation is essentially the home of the degrees, and so not as agile and adaptive as the Aviation Center is with regards to state funding and some other things. So for us, in aviation, so all of these students, you saw the number, you saw what the workforce looks like. There are a ton of opportunities. So we'll have incoming freshmen step foot on this campus this August, and 2 years from now, they'll be interviewing for a job at Delta Airlines, a career pathway. That is ridiculous to be age 20 and to be sitting there in front of HR team from Delta trying to get a job into their Delta Propel Pathway program. It's an awesome opportunity for our graduates, but we need folks that make good decisions. I joke about it with the students. I tell them my whole job in life is to make sure that when I get on that airplane and I see you in the cockpit, that I can relax. I don't want to get on there and be like, hey, you know, I left something in the terminal. I got to get off this airplane. I remember what you were like in class, and you shouldn't be flying up there. No, that's not the way the system works. And so people that get through Auburn Aviation are going to have wonderful careers ahead of them. And we want folks that are going to be thought leaders out there and make a positive difference in the world. And so, yes, we want them to be good pilots, all that kind of stuff, but we want them to be very, positive-minded, global-minded, and be folks that go out there and think about how things are going to change and be leaders in those positions, because again, there'll be a lot of change. So our 2 degrees are professional flight and aviation management. Some things we're working on are essentially an unmanned aircraft system, minor or potentially a major, and again, we're in the process of hiring some additional faculty, so once we get some extra bandwidth there, some of these visions will become more realities. And aviation wildlife management is an interesting one. So we have the School of Forestry and Wildlife Science here at Auburn University. Every airport post Sully Sullenberger accident is required to have a wildlife biologist on the airfield whose job it is to essentially manage the wildlife there. Because as we know, those were birds that they hit, and again, they were 2,000 feet up in the air. But if you go to Hartsfield, next time you land there, check it out on the bunkers on the side. There's like coyote bunkers. There's all kinds of stuff hidden in the kind of in the grass and all these other traps that they have set up. And so it's quite interesting. This is a new requirement. There's not a school in the United States that offers a degree in this. And so again, once we build a little extra bandwidth with our within our personnel, our team, this is something we want to do. The director of Hartsfield is actually an Auburn University grad. And so Kim Wade, and she actually teaches for us also. But this is a huge opportunity for Auburn, and again, something that would differentiate us from every other school. And so again, opportunities there. And we're also looking at doing a +1 MBA and a +1 MPA program for our aviation management students, the non-flying students essentially. So again, that professional flight, that's one of our degrees. 1,000-hour restricted ATP, the second degree is going to be the embedded or aviation management, which again, those folks will tend to go on to work in the airlines as operations managers, revenue managers. Some will go become air traffic controllers, but they all get a general business minor embedded in that program, so they understand the business side of things as well. So from the faculty perspective, we have a mix of folks that work between the Aviation Center and the Department of Aviation, so we have 7 full-time folks. 2 courtesy appointments. We do some research, and we work with folks in kinesiology, education, psychology, and so we have some courtesy appointments as well. Have about 38 flight instructors out there. We have a team of dispatchers, and our staff consists of folks that work with student services advising, and we have engagement. And so we hired an engagement director because we do so much outreach. So Friday, we're going to Huntsville to go meet with folks up in Boeing. We're coming home that night. We're hosting the Mayor's Ball that night. Saturday, we're going to be at City Fest. And And in the middle of all this, it's finals week next week and all these things. So we're a very active unit. We're not a large unit by terms of manning, but we're extremely active. And so having an engagement director to essentially keep us on track is a good thing. So our numbers of students. So this picture was taken a couple years ago when we all got on board an airliner and flew all the way up to Wichita, Kansas to go pick up a new airplane. I would argue that there's probably very few degrees on this campus where an airline will actually come in and pick up all your students and fly them. And it was flown by Auburn grads, which was kind of cool too. So this is a small American Eagle jet, but again, they've come in and picked up students, flown them to Dallas as well for tours. So you kind of get this, you almost get spoiled sometimes, but this is the airlines trying to recruit you to come work for them. And so, that's what that picture's from. So fall 2018, we had 359 students. About 2/3 of them were in the flight program, about 1/3 were in aviation management. Our year-over-year enrollment has increased by 30 or 20% the last 3 years. For our freshman classes last year, it increased by 45%, and it's going to increase again this year. And so the skies above Auburn are going to get busier and busier and busier. So this is an eye chart because this is an aviation brief, but basically these are our 4 degrees. So we still have students in the College of Business that are matriculating through, but those numbers are, so this is this is our total number of students between all the programs. We had less than 100 students back in 2015, 2016. This coming year we'll have over 400 aviation students in our program. Most of those will be on the professional flight side. And essentially the students that were in the College of Business that started there, that want to finish there, they're being allowed to do so. And then those degrees will be sunsetting in the College of Business, and all the new students are under the College of Liberal Arts. So our enrollment has increased dramatically. So if you think you see more airplanes up in the skies around Auburn, there's a reason for it. And again, but this will be about as large as we can get also. We can't get much higher. Auburn Airport does not have an air traffic control tower. So it's, there's non-towered procedures there. But we are starting to have that discussion about having a tower at Auburn Airport. The state of Alabama and the FAA are starting to take notice that there's a lot of activity in this region. This is our number of training devices. So basically everything in blue is our single engine airplanes. So this year we have 31 aircraft in our fleet. The dark blue is the single engine. We have 3 multi-engine airplanes, and then we have 7 flight simulators in our program. So again, going back to about 5 years ago, right after the university decided to keep the program, we were pretty small, and we've grown rapidly, and so now we have much better training capacity to handle all the students. For our facilities, we have the new Delta Airlines Aviation Education Building. We have at the Auburn University Regional Airport. The predominant amount of our education is done in this building. All the flight education is done in the new Delta building, but we still have a lot of classes that are on the main campus. We do not want students to come to Auburn University and this is the only building they ever see for 4 years. We want them to have experiences on the main campus and obviously build social equity with other degrees as well. So we love the fact our students love aviation, but we want them to be able to interact with people that are non-aviation too. So joke about it a lot, but it's a good healthy mix for them. And Tiger Transit runs out to this building, so it works out nice. And so y'all have probably seen the airport terminal. We do have some offices in there. My office is in there, Dr. Hutto, and then some of our staff, and then the Delta Airlines Aviation Education Building. So this was a journey that started about 3 years ago with a visit to Delta. And again, never hurts when their CFO is a Auburn University graduate. But they have a need for pilots. We have a vision for growing our program, so it was a nice natural marriage or partnership. And it took a little while to seal the deal, but today Dr. Leith loves to sell the idea that this is a corporate building, a corporate partnership. And we're the only university collegiate aviation program that has a Delta Airlines Aviation Education Building. I was at Ohio State last week. They have a new building too. It was a lot smaller than ours. So we're very fortunate. And we have a new maintenance hangar out there as well. So these were the artist concepts as we, as we were going through this process. And again, here's the maintenance hangar back in the days when we had a groundbreaking down there to thank Delta for their funding. And lots of Auburn aviation. So there's Carl Thompson. Some of y'all know him. And so, but lots of Auburn grads at Delta Airlines, and which again is never a bad thing. So there's the product of all that work is this video right here. So this is our new building, and an Airbus 320 simulator in there. This is where the flight instructors, this is their bullpen, essentially where they keep their stuff. So we have three classrooms in this building. Again, everything's designed for the flipped classroom, lots of technology. Barriers are essentially look like the inside of a wing, the fuel, the spars inside the wing and the pulleys and cables. So it's kind of some cool little touches they put in the building. And this grass, this is where phase 2 is going to go, and we've already had our first meeting on phase 2 because we're gonna hit while the iron's hot right now. And so this was built for 300 flight students. We're above that already, so we're actually already working on doubling the size of this building with the architects here at Auburn University. So we're not done growing. There's a lot of building left to do. And then our final home, if you want to call it, that's down at Gulf Shores, Alabama. We have an office down there where we can do continuing education training, drone training for law enforcement and things like that. I'm thinking about every Friday afternoon we need to fly down there just to do a quick check to make sure the office is secure, but but we've been so busy with other things and haven't been able to nail that one down yet. But we'd love to have a larger footprint down on the Gulf Coast, and one day that vision may become a reality as well. We are accredited every 5 years by the Aviation Accreditation Board, which is actually started by folks from Auburn University. But way back in the 50s and 60s, because essentially the program was in engineering, and the engineering deans like, you got to be accredited, and so it's not an engineering program, so they went out and started what is now Aviation Accreditation Board International. So their international headquarters is actually here in Auburn, or technically in Opelika now, but we just got reaccredited by them for another 5 years, and for those of y'all that are around academia know that's always a fun process, but we're on the backside of that, so good for 5 years. Our research, so kind of looking through the lens of the teaching, looking at research. So we're members of 2 FAA Centers of Excellence, which are essentially consortiums between industry and education partners. There's about 20 different universities that are partners of this. And again, if we want to be on the leading edge of any research, you got to get out there and play and have some visibility. And post 9/11, Auburn really wasn't involved in a lot of research in aviation. And quite honestly, there probably wasn't a lot going on just because of where the industry was. But again, today, because of the shortage of folks and the need for folks to come in the industry and making it interesting for digital natives, there's a lot of research being done in virtual reality, augmented reality, and that's what this group, this Technical Training and Human Performance, focuses in on, is how do you build workforces? And so we serve on the executive leadership committee of that, and we've actually partnered with the Army Gaming Studio, which is part of Ameredeck up at Huntsville, because the Army actually has the same exact problem. They're like, hey, we can't necessarily send recruiters into high school to come find certain types of kids, but what we can do is we can build games that they can use online. We can build tools. So the Army Gaming Studio has all these nice apps and tools that they built to help students in high school, but there is kind of a subliminal message too that, hey, if you're interested in joining the Army, we'll pay for college and all that. So it's quite interesting. This whole digital transformation in the workforce is not just unique to colleges, but the military and pretty much across the board. So we're also, so we have a grant that's coming up where we're going to start using virtual reality in the pipeline to help students learn faster. The Air Force went to this model last year. It's called Pilot Training Next, where they started infusing virtual reality, augmented reality. And what they found is their students learn faster. Their ability to learn, the rate of knowledge uptake was a lot faster. And then they were able to apply that in the airplane much earlier in their flight career. And so the Air Force ended up, they used to solo folks in pilot training at about 15 rides in the T6. In the small group tryout where they tried some of these new technologies, they were getting people to solo at about 6 to 7 rides. So when you think about that through the lens of the Air Force, they've essentially just doubled their fleet. And so for us, if we have a capacity issue, if we can insert some new technologies that help, of course you got to get the FAA on board with it too. Department of Defense doesn't have to worry about the FAA in terms of certification. So a little bit different for us, but we're going to be a part of this research effort because again, with almost 300 flight students here, there's a nice study population there. And it'll probably benefit all those students that decide to volunteer to be a part of it. We're also part of the FAA's UAS Center of Excellence as well. So again, lots of research being done in that area. And then the third triad, if you think about teaching, research, and outreach, we do a ton of outreach with youth programs. We run summer camps. So this is Mr. Terry Waldrop. He's a Auburn Aviation Management graduate. It's him in front of I believe that was an engine from a 747-400 a couple of years ago before they retired that particular airplane. But we go down to Delta Tech Ops, which is their maintenance facility. So if you fly out of Atlanta and you see Fly Delta jets, the world's largest cantilever, I think it's 40 or 400, I can't remember how many football fields fit inside that. I think it's 40. It's a huge building, and I guess 40 would make sense. But we take students down there. We have these summer youth programs where essentially, again, we bring the students here. They're resident programs. We work with outreach. So they get to fly. They go see the maintenance side of the house. They work with drones. They work with aerospace engineering. They get the whole enchilada here. We take them down to Tuskegee to learn about the history, which, by the way, the Tuskegee Airmen, they were also part of that civilian pilot training program in 1939. And I did learn a couple weeks ago that they actually trained here before they trained at Tuskegee, so found where it was documented. So there's a lot of history here, but we again try to show the students all the different career opportunities available to them. The governor has a black belt commission, so again working on that, try to get students from certain rural areas within the state of Alabama, find those students that have an interest in aviation and help them get here. So the U.S. military right now has a shortage of, or the Air Force has a shortage of almost 3,000 pilots, and they're desperate. There are scholarships, things like that. So if we can find the right students, maybe first-generation college students, get them to Auburn. If they're on an Air Force or military scholarship, they can go on and fly in the military. And again, when you think about the history of aviation in this state, that would be a pretty cool circle to complete. And so we have student organizations, and I'll talk about those in just a second. We hosted the Junior ROTC Flight Academy last summer, where the Air Force paid a lot, or selected a lot of junior ROTC students to come and get their private pilot certificate. Again, trying to get students interested in aviation, which, you know, for us, those of us in aviation, sounds like that'd be easy. But you have to realize Top Gun came out in the 80s, and, you know, that's when aviation got really popular. And so, you know, just got to get Tom Cruise out there and do Top Gun 2, which I hear is in the works. Yes. So we'll see. But it's interesting now because a lot of young folks, they'd rather work on the drone side of things because they see that's where the future is, and this manned aircraft stuff, that's old technology. So anyway, up for everybody to decide. But for our training equipment, we have 31 aircraft right now, 28 Cessna 172s, 3 Piper Seminoles. So that's what we train in. We're on a 7-year fleet repurchase replacement plan. Auburn University's always rented the aircraft. We're in the business of buying them now. It lowers the unit cost the more you fly them, and obviously you get new aircraft that way, so it works out nicely. And they're all G1000 cockpits, meaning they're all glass. They're very, very nice. Much better than anything we ever had in the Air Force back in the day. So then we have some simulators. So our student organizations, we have the War Eagle Flying Team, the WEFT. They've been around forever. They're competing in nationals in Madison, Wisconsin in the next week after next. And so they made it to the nationals, and they competed at the regional levels to get there, and they almost beat Embry-Riddle University this year, which, like, nobody ever beats them. They're the gorilla out of the pack in the sense that, you know, they're just such a large university. So our folks came within like 2 seconds of a time on target of beating them this year. So we've risen in the rankings every year, and that's ultimately the goal, is to knock off Embry-Riddle. You still get to go to nationals and compete with them there, so perhaps it may happen there. Women in Aviation, we have a War Eagle chapter. So Girls in Aviation Day is coming up in October 2019. Some of y'all may remember last fall we had a Girls in Aviation Day at the airport. So Women in Aviation is a group dedicated to essentially adding, trying to educate folks about opportunities, young ladies to come and work in the industry, add diversity. It's a predominantly white male industry, and again, everybody in the industry is trying to get it to better reflect, the current status of our country with regards to career opportunities out there for folks. And so Girls in Aviation, or Women in Aviation, was actually an organization founded by somebody from Auburn back in the 90s, and Carolyn Williamson and some other folks. But again, this is a huge organization, internationally speaking, and we do a fly-in essentially every fall. And so that's going to be the first weekend in October this coming fall. We did one last year, had about 1,000 people come out. And it's a lot of fun. The airlines, we had regional airlines flying and all, so if you have know folks that may be interested, and you'll start to see this come up in the press again, but it was a lot of fun. Our 3 other student organizations, we have Alpha Eta Rho, which is our professional fraternity. Essentially, they're very business-oriented, do a lot of field trips. We have the Striped Wing Student Ambassadors. They're funded through the Aviation Center, and they also host all of our student tours. We had over 500 tours this year, which is an incredible amount. 4 years ago, we did like 5 tours that whole year. Now we do like literally, it's like one of the most busy things I do. Every Monday and Friday, we offer 2 tours, and so we have a lot of folks come through. Oshkosh, Sun and Fun, these folks go down and recruit there. Then we have Eta Mu Sigma, which is our National Honor Society. This thing was formed, Auburn University is the only collegiate aviation program in the country that has an honor society. It was formed back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it kind of went on hiatus during the early 2000s when it was in the College of Business, but our students picked it up, dusted it off, reorganized it last year, and it is an active, viable student organization. So we have 5 student organizations right now that are extremely active, keep us all very busy. You guys may have seen in the news last year in some of the alum publications, the Air Race Classic. Auburn University up until 2017 never participated in the Air Race Classic. It used to be called the Powder Puff Derby and some other things, but essentially it's an all-women air race that's been going on for over 100 years in this country. And when we celebrated the anniversary of women coming to Auburn, so 2017, that was the first year that Auburn University competed. Again, it was funded through university help pay for it, but now we have private donors and some other folks that have, other organizations that have stepped in. So this year we're actually doing 2 races. So this is our team in 2017, Ashley on the right there. So Ashley was you always send 1 student, 1 flight instructor. So Ashley was the flight instructor this year, Kendall was the student. The next year, Ashley went as the flight instructor. She's flying at the airlines now. And then Maddie was the student. So in 2018, they ended up placing 3rd in the entire country. And so this is a race, and again, it changes every year. But this year it's gonna start in Jackson, Tennessee, and they race, it's an air race all the way across the eastern half of the United States. And we're actually sending 2 teams this year. And so we'll have some interdepartmental rivalries here, I guess, amongst our own team. But again, when we go out and blow the doors off of other collegiate aviation programs, it's a cool thing. And again, Auburn is just now kind of getting into this Air Race Classic. We're kind of late to the fight, but to jump in and take 3rd place your 2nd year is pretty awesome. And actually this year, it was really interesting because that was the year Dr. Gouge retired, moved to Santa Fe that first year. The race ended that year, so he and his wife came out and met them, took them out to dinner, and it was pretty cool. So the future, what does the future hold? Who knows? We need pilots. We need a lot of aviation professionals. But as a general trend, we're going to see a lot closer education and industry support. And again, we see that in the Delta Airlines Aviation Education Building. We see it all the time on the ramp. Airlines fly airplanes like this, Embraer 170 in here. So this is Republic Airways. They fly for Delta, American, and but this is essentially the airplanes that our students will fly at a whopping age 23, a year after they graduate from Auburn. This will be their office space, and then they'll be there for about 4 or 5 years, and then they'll move on to the big airlines. So we get a lot of airlines that fly in here. They just come down, park the jet, and let folks come out and tour it kind of thing, and they're hoping to get folks to come fly for them. So a lot of recruiting trips. So when you see these airliners fly into Auburn, nobody's offering commercial service here yet, but that's what they're down here is they're recruiting. So the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the other branches is concerned about a lack of pilots and a lack of folks coming into the aviation industry. And again, you got to be pretty STEM intensive. So they see it as a defense issue in the sense of a shortage of professional folks in aviation that understand or have the backgrounds in STEM. And on the commercial side, a lot of folks, especially in the upper Midwest, places like the Dakotas, Nebraska, where essentially you can't just jump in the car and drive an hour, 2 hours and be in a large metropolitan area, to where you have to have air service to get to large regional areas. So places up in North Dakota, Jamestown, some of the smaller cities that have regional air service that's being cut, that's their lifeline to their economy. And so it becomes a problem. So the most political action that you'll probably see to help cure the pilot shortage is going to come from the most rural, from political organizations within their political politicians within the most rural parts of the country, essentially. So there is a flight instructor shortage across the country, again, because as soon as I graduate, I get 1,000 hours. I can either fly these little airplanes or I can fly this thing and make a lot more money. Well, it's a pretty easy decision. And so the turnover in flight instructors is 100%. We know right now all the flight instructors that are flying with us today at Auburn, they'll all be gone within a year. So we have to constantly be, tending the field, basically growing the next batch of flight instructors. And so we have to continually develop those folks. So there is a shortage, and it's real. But again, it's great opportunities on the backside for these students. The debate about the quality of training versus the quantity of training, the changes that occurred post Colgan Air accident, still an issue. Again, because there's a shortage of pilots, some folks will say, well, why did you raise the requirements up to 1,500 hours when it was all good at 250 hours? Well, there's not a lot of politicians that are going to put their neck out and say, yeah, I think we should lower the pilot standards, because what's going to happen the first time there's an accident? They're going to be like, see, told you so. And so I don't think the rollback of any pilot certification is going to happen, but we'll continue to have this debate about the quality of training versus the quantity of training. And what's happened is right now, airlines have always loved to hire from the military because they know the quality of training is really good. The experience you get in the military is very intense. And so you're going to be prepared when you're out there, flying for the airlines. If they don't have that pool to choose from in large numbers like they used to, they're going to go to other places where they know they're going to get a predictable product that's going to perform at a high level. So they love going to the colleges, because if they hire folks just off the street, folks that maybe have flight experience but they don't know their background, that accepts a little more risk from the airlines in the sense that we're not sure where this person learned to fly. Is he going to be the next Colgan Air captain kind of person? And so with that, colleges have become very popular. They'd rather essentially find you when you're young, help groom you, help educate you, and help mold you into what they want at the airlines, which is essentially somebody that's reliable, dependable, and smart, makes good decisions. And so through all this at Auburn, our future, connecting the dots of opportunity is going to be the key. And so again, day to day, we're always looking for new opportunities to grow the program, new partnerships. And so that's what you're seeing with all these changes with the Delta building, the additional aircraft coming in, and again, trying to find these partnerships with the Air Force last summer, with the Air Force Junior ROTC, and things like Delta Propel. And so this is a career pathway program for our students that Delta started to consider about 4 years ago. They made a visit here. They were like, explain to us how your program works, what do your students learn? And we kind of did this gap analysis to see how far it was from our students, their knowledge base, to be able to go work at Delta. And so over the years, we worked together to develop this program, but it is a Delta proprietary program. They were obviously here collecting data and working with other schools. And so, because again, if they know there's going to be a pilot shortage, or there is one that started, how are they going to secure their future if they don't have a pipeline of pilots to choose from? And so they are the first major airline, not a regional, but a major airline, to do this type of career pathway program. They announced the program back last summer, came to Auburn. That's their chief pilot on the left, Steve Dixon, who retired shortly after this, and now he's been nominated to lead the FAA. But this is essentially a career pathway program where Auburn University flight students, once they start their junior year and have their private done, they can apply to be in this program and essentially be on a pathway to work at Delta within 42 months after graduating. So to be 26 years old flying at Delta in a 737 is like, everybody my generation and older's dream. Those things didn't happen that fast for folks. And so again, we got to make sure our students are held to high standards. You cannot come here and have too much fun your freshman year and try to clean up your GPA the second year, because if that's how you roll, you're going to miss the boat on these opportunities. And so we hold our students to a very high standard, and we want them to do well out there, because again, I joke about it, but I want to relax when I get on the plane and see you. And that's for all of us faculty. So the program is at Auburn, lots of history, obviously, but there's been years of ups and downs, basically reflecting what has happened in the airline industry. Again, when things are good, they're really good, and things are bad, they're really, really bad. So again, trying to find the middle ground there, and again, Auburn Aviation, a lot of investment going in the program right now, a lot of support from alums, from industry, government through research, and all these other types of opportunities. But essentially, to work in aviation, you got to have a lot of passion for it, and there's a lot of economic opportunity out there. It's not a cheap endeavor to get into. Certainly going to college isn't today in 2019, but there's a ton of opportunity. And last year, I mean, our job placement rate was 100% for pilots, and so, you know, that's a pretty awesome thing. So our aviation friends, there's an old saying that essentially if you've, you know, got a mile of pavement in front of you and you're in a car, you can go 1 mile. If you got a mile of pavement in front of you in an airplane, you can go anywhere in the world. For the pilots in the room, that does depend on temperature, pressure, altitude, and those things too, weight of the aircraft. But for those that want to get technical, but basically it's a very global business, and you know, we want our students to have that that mindset and to go out there and take advantage of all those opportunities. So that's basically all I got, and kind of the program in a nutshell of where we're going. And so the reason I ended up at Auburn, I'm from Texas originally, but I flew C-130s in the Air Force, and there were so many folks that I met that were Auburn University grads, and they all spoke highly of this program. I grew up in Texas in the 1980s, pre-internet. The only thing you knew about Auburn was Bo Jackson, because he was always on the cover of the Sunday morning Houston Chronicle paper, and you know, Bo Over the Top or whatever. And you know, so it was quite fun after a military career to be able to get to come here. And actually, a lot of those friends that were Auburn grads are now my guest speakers in the classes and stuff, and so, and tailgate friends, a lot of fun. So, but it's been a wonderful journey to be a part of this program, and certainly invite you to ask questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't think any of us in here are candidates for the program, but I think we're probably all interested in how it's going to affect our lives in Auburn.
How the aviation program growing, how it's going to affect your lives. So, well, hopefully positively in the sense it's, you know, continues to be a good news story. We do get a few noise complaints at the airport from time to time about, you know, houses that are on the runway. But I think from Auburn University's perspective and the city's perspective, aviation jobs, aviation careers tend to be very high-paying, high-tech kind of things. And so the more attraction you get from that area, that's a good thing. And again, to be on the front end of all this technology.
Any prediction on when we might be able to fly out of
Oh, okay. Oh, commercial service? I'll have to call Dr. Hutto on that one.
Atlanta?
So, it's always a popular question. So the thing with the airlines coming to Auburn, so they have to have, basically you can fly in here with less than 30 passengers on an airplane. Anything above that, you have to have fire department on station, all that kind of stuff. So actually, when some of these big airplanes come in, they do have to bring fire trucks out there. But for commercial service, you have to have crash, fire, rescue. Runway's going to have to be longer, and there's some other infrastructure things that are going to happen. Build a terminal and have security, TSA, and all those things there. Realistically, I don't really see it happening anytime soon, because you can jump in your car, go 90 miles, and be in Atlanta and get on a plane and go anywhere nonstop in the world. That being said, you never know. And maybe Auburn and East Alabama build a really big airport somewhere, and then that becomes the regional airport. I don't know, but so it would be nice. So the Groom Transportation Lobby may argue with that. No, I'm just kidding. But pushback. So you never know. We get asked that question a lot. So any other questions? It's the end of the semester. Quiet group. What's on the final? No, I'm just kidding.
What is the maximum age to get in the program?
Yeah, there is no maximum age to get in the program. So you just get maximum age to retire. So you just got to work it backwards of what's the payoff and the benefit. So we do have veterans in the program that, you know, enlisted in the military at age 18, did a 20-year career. Now they're 38, 39. They're coming here. They're starting this program, getting their college. And then they'll have a 20-year career in the airlines when they graduate. So that's the top end that I've seen. I'm 51, and I had a guy that graduated from the Air Force Academy 4 years after me call me the other day that wants to start the program. He just retired from, so he's 47, probably, and he wants to start the program. So he might set the next record. We'll see. So, yes, sir.
I know there's a shortage of mechanics also.
Absolutely.
The situation, maybe setting up accredited mechanics.
So the 2-year schools in the state of Alabama do the A&P, and we've met with all of the ones. So Ozark's the biggest, and then Coastal down in Brooklyn Complex down in Mobile. So we're working with them to build pathway programs for students that do their A&P there and then transfer here to finish a 4-year degree. And then Southern Union got a new president, and they know they visited us a couple weeks ago to what is all that? How do you spell AMP and all these kind of things? And so they are extremely interested in knowing Todd Checkett. I don't think there'll be a lot of roadblocks. I can tell you right now that that's one of our challenges too, is making sure we have enough maintenance folks to work here, because they can, once they get a little experience, they can run down to Delta and make a lot more. So if we had some school here at Auburn, perhaps Southern Union had a campus with AMP and could produce AMPs, we could put those people to work right away when they finish. They can get some experience. They can finish their 4-year degree here at Auburn through aviation management. So then you got a 4-year degree, you got an AMP, and you've got several years of experience working here. You can run down to Atlanta and do quite well for yourself. Not that you couldn't do that here too, but their travel benefits are going to be better than ours, I guess. So, but I think that's, I can't speak for Southern Union, but I think that there's a very real possibility that that could happen. There's a ton of interest. The 2-year schools in the state of Alabama have always been pretty stovepipe, don't necessarily, kind of compete against each other, but the pie is big enough for everybody right now, and they have a new director for technical, or for aviation training in the 2-year system in the state of Alabama. And he's a maintenance guy, so he's shaking things up. So yeah. So. Any other questions? Get out of class early. So. Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. So.